Water-type Pokemon are some of the most common in any given generation. Whether you're going all the way back to Generation 1 with water types like Vaporeon and Golduck, or all the way to Generation 9 where we have Pokemon like Veluza and of course Dondozo and Tatsugiri. But what water types are the strongest to use competitive? In today's video, I'm going to answer that question by ranking every water type in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet based on its competitive viability. If you enjoy this type of content and you want to see some more, of course, make sure to leave a like and subscribe and answer the comment question of the day. What water type is your favorite to use in competitive? My personal favorite is Quaquaval this generation. It's been such a fun mon, but let me know your guys' answers below. And with that said, shoutouts to Kurt as always for editing these videos. His links will be down below, and let's get started by going over how we're doing this tier list. To start off with, let's get into our S+. These are going to be for Pokemon that truly you cannot end up justify lacking on a team because they're that influential. The only way that you could really justify these is maybe for a bunch of different S tiers that just fit your team slightly better, or actually drastically better, I should say. But even still, typically speaking, these S+ are undeniably the best choice on a given team. The S tiers are going to be for Pokemon that you could definitely still most likely be prioritizing in teams, but you're not exactly going to be outright unviable for running these as your best mons. They can definitely still carry a team for sure, but unless they're really competing with the slot for the S+, they're usually still pretty good. The A tiers are going to be for Pokemon that are still fairly strong. These are where you start to get into the Pokemon that don't necessarily influence the metagame, but they're still really strong picks. B tiers are going to be for Pokemon that you'll still have to at least be prepared for, but you no longer need to have dedicated counterplay for. C tiers are going to be for more niche stuff. This would be for counterplay that's most likely going to be meant to handle your S's and S+, but it doesn't really need to handle everything, just a single mon or two, and have a nice place in the metagame for that. Moving on to our D tier lineup, a D tier Pokemon would most likely be something that is really just a YouTuber pick. You might see me throw this in a thumbnail on the channel with the text that says broken on it, but that doesn't mean it actually is, believe it or not. And the F tiers are going to be for Pokemon that are so egregiously bad I can't even make these work, because you guys will just know looking at it that mon could never do anything. Starting off, of course, we do have a fairly not good Pokemon this generation, none other than Golduck. Now, Golduck is definitely what I would consider probably in the C tier, actually. It does have a few niches going for it. For one, if we look into the Swift Swim Pokemon, Golduck actually does have one nice benefit this generation, being that it's a special Swift Swimmer, which might not actually seem too uncommon, but when you look at special Swift Swim Pokemon this gen, the best one is probably Basculegion Female because of the mixed offense it has with Last Respects as well in its move pool, and then you just throw on a couple special options and bam. But the second highest special attack for a Swift Swim user this gen is actually Golduck. Moving on to Slowpoke, this is definitely going to be a YouTuber pick. Slowbro, on the other hand, though, and Slowking, I'm actually going to put in the F tier. Now, I think for Psychic, I put these things in the D tier, but in hindsight, I feel like I've actually just Actually, no, that's a lie. Slowbro can get the F tier, but Slowking can get the D tier as well. Slowking has one nice benefit going for it, actually, that's been popping up a lot in Regulation C that I think I kind of slept on, but the Chilly Reception move is actually fairly decent on this thing. It's a great Trick Room setter for snow teams in particular because it can not only give the team a really good slow mode, but you also have a nice way of clearing opposing weather and even pivoting it into a potential fast mode for the slow teams. Meanwhile, with Slowpoke at the very least, it's a nice Violet mon, and it's slower than things like Torkoal, so you can get some good damage off. Though you also have the ability to run a Violet, which is actually a fairly uncontested item slot in this format. Really, the only other thing I could think of that even kind of runs a Violet is other YouTuber picks like Gothorita or Bisharp, like other things you would really only see on like a clickbait team, specifically to go out of your way to use these mons. Though I think that Gothorita had like a single Tora performance if I remember correctly, so maybe less so that, but definitely towards the other mons. The point being though is that Slowpoke at least has that niche, and Slowking has the niche of being a pivot, but what does Slowbro have? Like really, what does Slowbro actually have? It has Oblivious, which is kind of cool, but really, I feel like Slowbro is just not that good this gen. Moving on, we have none other than Cloyster. Cloyster also can probably get a D tier. This thing has a couple nice things going for it, one being Shell Smash and two being Skill Link. You can kind of make this thing work, I guess, with a nice like redirection Pokemon, and specifically a mix that with stuff like Icicle Spear and then like Shell Smash and Surf would probably be decent, but that's probably really the best benefit you're actually going to get out of Cloyster. I will say though, Skill Link is a little bit less good now due to the fact that loaded dice exists, and you can now compete with something like a Baxcalibur that can do the same thing with 4 to 5 hits minimum. Though one good benefit to Cloyster is the fact that you can still run a Focus Sash doing this, which is kind of decent. So we'll give it a D tier. We have our first actually pretty decent water type being Tauros, Paldean Water. This thing can get an easy B tier. I think it might even deserve an A tier to be honest, but I'm a little bit hesitant just due to the fact that I feel like that other water types do give a little bit more competition to the bulky water roll. But Tauros has a lot going for it. For one, the water fighting I think is actually incredible. This is a really good offensive and defensive typing. Offensively speaking, you have the benefit of being able to just pressure a lot of things due to fighting having such a good offensive presence, and the fact that you are a physical water type, which despite the fact that a lot of swimmers happen to be really good physical waters, overall it's not exactly that common to be a good physical water type due to the fact that water's move pool skews more on the special end. But in Tauros' case, it has options like Aqua Jet and Wave Crash, which really do benefit this thing a lot. Items like Mirror Orb, for example, have been really prevalent on Tauros Gen, though I think ultimately one of the best things you can run on this thing is the safety goggles, which helps you get around one of your worst matchups being a Mungus, due to the fact that you no longer have to hit directly into something that would otherwise resist both your stabs, and it's one of the only Pokemon that can really do that besides like a Gyarados. So let's talk about where I'm going to rank Gyarados today. I think a few months ago when I did Flying, this thing was definitely in like the A or B tier for me, and I think even when I did my Regulation C tier list, this thing proved to be an A tier for sure. However, I think I'm actually pretty confident in giving this thing a low S tier as of right now. This has proven to be one of the best Pokemon in Regulation C as the metagamers went on, and I still think this actually will hold a lot of merit going into Regulation D. Now, I think it's going to be one of those things where people aren't going to immediately use Gyarados until it picks up a bit in terms of the format actually developing, which is fine. A similar trend happened in Regulation C where it took a little bit for Gyarados to really pick off, and it didn't really hit until tournaments happened. But I think that once Worlds actually happens, Gyarados will still be a pretty top contender. This thing could be a decent check to a lot of different physical threats, stuff like Ursaluna, for example. If you ran like a Tara Steel set, probably I think would be the best one, because you could go from having a complete immunity to Earthquake to now resisting Facade in exchange for maybe taking on that Earthquake weakness, which could actually present a lot of good 50-50s there. It's something where I think that due to the support that Gyarados does have, I think it actually is a little bit better matchup into mons like Ursaluna, and just general all the physical threats in this format, such as Palafin as well. So I think that Gyarados will actually hold a pretty strong place in the format. I don't want to say it's going to still be as good as Regulation C, because truthfully there's so much better quality of Pokemon that were introduced with Home that I think Gyarados will have a little bit competition in terms of just a team slot, but ultimately a really strong Intimidate Mon will be appreciated for sure. Moving on to Vaporeon can definitely get a D tier. This thing was at one point or another a pretty okay response to Dondozo, but honestly Dondozo's barely being ran right now, so this thing has kind of fallen from a niche pick to just a YouTuber pick. It still is kind of funny, and you can kind of make this thing into like a shitty Gastron with like a Terra Fire set, and then going for like Haze plus Wish or something with Muddy Water. But ultimately, this is definitely just a worse Gastron with that happens to have Haze. It's the one benefit. Definitely a D tier. Azumarill is gonna get an A tier. I think I'm kind of iffy on this. Actually, no, I'm gonna give Azumarill an S tier as well. I think that Azumarill is kind of proven to be just a really good option on Rain, and it's kind of adapted actually to be a consideration over Palafin for a few reasons. At least in Regulation C, one of the biggest reasons you would run Azumarill is the fact that it's Palafin that you don't have to switch out, and it has a little bit better defensive matchups into mons like Chiyu and Chiampao due to the fact that you resist their Dark Stab as well as the Fire and Ice Stabs respectively. On top of this as well, just having a really good bulky fairy is really appreciated, because as of Regulation C, the only good fairy is Fluttermane, so having another one that's actually kind of viable, being Azumarill without needing to Terra, is actually really good. Now, when we look into Regulation D, I think Azumarill will have a bit more competition, but honestly, this thing still has a lot of the same benefits. Looking at some of the best mons right now, this is a great check to Pokemon like Heatran, because it's a fairy that is neutral to Steel, which is amazing. On top of this as well, you can potentially run like a Sapsip Repair set, which would be amazing at beating Heatran due to your fire resistance, as well as the fact that you are still neutral to Steel, and you can potentially even Whirlpool it in, which is pretty good. I think that overall Azumarill definitely has a lot of the same sets that it can run in Regulation D and still be fairly viable, and I think we'll even see a lot of the same playstyles, though Azumarill I think ultimately will just serve as a really good anti-meta response. I think it's kind of a low S, to be honest. This thing could maybe end up moving down to A depending on how the tier list shapes up, but ultimately I feel pretty strong on Azumarill's placement, and I don't exactly think as of right now that I'm looking to put this thing any lower than an S tier, but that might change as we go through the rest of the mons. Moving on though, we do have Quagsire, which is another kind of niche pick. This thing is just shitty Gastron, but it's slightly better than Vaporeon due to the fact that you have Unaware, which could be pretty decent actually. We have a lot of good setup mons right now. For example, we have stuff, actually, no, that's a lie. I feel like that right now, really a lot of the mons are just opting for using the Ruins for offenses. And I can't really actually think of a good setup mon now that I'm saying that out loud. I thought there would be more, but honestly, there's a lot of mons that can run setup. But looking at Regulation D though, I mean, I guess really Iron Hands is probably one of the best ones. I'm actually going to put this thing in the F tier. I don't think Quack is that good anymore. Quack's ability with Unaware probably isn't really that appreciated, and truthfully, I don't even think it's going to have much of a niche in the Zacian metagame due to the fact that Terra exists, and if Zacian for some reason really was that scared of Quagsire, I think we'd maybe just see Terra Grass, like Terra Blast pop up, but I don't even really think that Zacian will need to fear Quagsire, so I'm going to give this thing an F tier. Quillfish. Quillfish gets a D tier. This thing is just the funnier version of running Hisuian Quillfish, which at least gets in a Violite, so it doesn't need to compete with item slot, and it has a slightly worse typing than Hisuian Quillfish. However, at the very least though, having resistance to Dondozo built in is kind of cool because you can be a kind of cool like Haze plus T-Spike roll compression with Intimidate. So I'll give this thing at least a D tier. It's kind of funny. Moving on to Delibird. This thing at least a D tier. It's kind of funny. Moving on to Delibird.
What? Delibird?
Pelipper. I've already mentioned this thing is a B tier. I think Pelipper is actually pretty decent right now. You could maybe make a case for A tier, but I think that I'm still leaning a little bit towards Rain being a not great weather. At the very least, it does open up a lot of other really good Pokemon, such as Basculegion, which is actually pretty decent, but it's a lot less good than I thought it would be. I think Pelipper is going to be one of those things where it can have a really good showing every once in a while, but I don't think that Rain is really just that favored in the metagame. We have a lot of really good grasses right now, such as Amoonguss, Rillaboom, Heatran technically, and also Wo-Chien, of course, all of which are fairly good, really bulky responses to a lot of common water types, so I don't really think that we actually need to really be focusing on Rain anymore. And even into, for example, with the Basculegion, you can revenge kill it pretty easily just due to the fact that there's so much good speed control, booster energy stuff exists, and you kind of do need to run Tailwind as well in tandem with Rain, which just makes it a lot less viable. With stuff like Sun, you benefit just by being Paradox Pokemon. With Hail, you benefit by benefiting Bundle, which is one of the best Pokemon anyway. And with Sand, you don't need a team. You never did. It's just that Lycanroc is a really good 6 slot for that, and Tyranitar is just that good of a Pokemon. So Rain just needs a lot going for it right now, and I don't really think it has the pieces to be that viable, but it will be something that can always just be a good anti-meta response. Moving on, we have Whiscash. No, bad Pokemon, F tier. This one can get the lowest. Actually, no. Yeah, this can get the lowest spot. Love Disc, even worse. Kyogre, fuck you. This thing is an S+. This thing, truthfully, probably deserves its own tier. But Kyogre is something else. This thing will be an incredible monster, whether it's Terra Water sets that are just trying to boost Water set further, Terra Grass sets that are meant for more defensive matchups, as well as just trying to get matchups into Gastrodon, which is really one of the only current checks. However, with the moveset of like Terra Blast Grass plus Thunder plus Origin Pulse and then Protect, you're pretty nearly unchecked. You could also obviously opt for Ice Beam, which will do enough damage to Gastrodon. I'm pretty sure a spec set would like 3 a KO, if not even 2 a KO Gastrodon. So there is that. And you could also, of course, just do the common thing of partner slotting into that bundle matchup for Gastrodon, and that would be plenty fine as well, because bundle plus the Kyogre will be monstrous together. Overall, easy S+. This is a no-brainer. One of the best restricted. It's one of those things where you're actively just hurting your team not running Kyogre, because Kyogre just does that much damage, and it's so easy to slap on a team and just do spread Origin Pulse and win games. Moving on, we do have none other than Floatzel. Now, Floatzel is an interesting one. I actually still think that Floatzel is a pretty good pick for Swim. It has 115 speed, which is actually pretty fast for Rain, and Wave Crash plus Aqua Jet also just do a lot of damage to most people, especially with Tower Water sets and Choice Band. I think that Floatzel at least is one of the few Rain options that can actually be fairly viable on a fast team, and I think weirdly enough, that alone gives it at least a C tier. Obviously, it's power creep damage-wise, but you could do enough damage with Terra Water, Choice Band, and Wave Crash, and at least kind of justify its team spot. Yeah, it does okay. We'll give this thing a C tier at least. Gastrodon is going to get an A tier. I think Gastrodon has proven this thing always will at least have kind of a matchup in any given team. It's never going to be like the meta, I think. No teams are really going to be saying Gastrodon is the call, because it just isn't. But Gastrodon will always have a strong enough matchup into teams where I feel like that it's kind of just proven that most teams will at least have enough of a good matchup. And I know I've repeated that line a lot, but I feel pretty confident in it, because most teams typically do struggle to kill Terrify or Gastrodon, I found, barring like the Great Tusk on them. Or I guess in this format now you have like Lando T. But even still, a lot of good Pokemon do handle those pretty well. Like for example, Iron Bundle is one of the best mons. Fluttermane can put decent pressure on both, despite of course not being super effective in the Lando. It just does a lot of damage. You obviously do have stuff like Terra Ice Regieleki, you have Urshifu Rapid Strike. You have a lot of good partners that are like absolutely meta-defining Pokemon. They can just handle that few weaknesses that Gastrodon actually has. And also, especially with Urshifu Rapid being in the format, this is a really good check to that. So I'm going to definitely give Gastrodon a solid A tier. I think it's a pretty good pick personally, and I don't think enough people are actually talking about it. So we'll give this thing an A tier. The Minion, I unironically think this thing is a C tier. This thing has enough good support with stuff like Safeguard, also Tailwind, you have Chilling Water. Like, this thing could be an unironically good Pokemon, and I've even gotten the chance to use this thing in Radiation 2 at least, and I think this thing did good enough personally. It's not exactly some game-changing option, but it has enough really unique options with stuff like Storm Drain, Tailwind, etc., where I think you could at least make a case for C tier. I don't want to say that this thing is like some really top-tier mon or anything, but it's good enough to use for sure, and I'm kind of shocked that this hasn't at least had an okay showing as like a Palafin check. I'm actually really shocked by that, because I feel like this is a good enough option to consider for that, especially during all the Palafin hype that had like Palin's cores at the top. I'm shocked the Minion never popped off. Rotom Wash can get a solid B tier. This thing is definitely a B tier, and I think it's probably the most consistent B tier. With stuff like Terra Fire, Terra Fairy, really just any good defensive Terra is really good on this Pokemon. Even Terra Electric is a good offensive one with no weaknesses, as well as the fact that you can boost your electric stab even further. Typically sets with like Nasty Plot plus 3 attacks are pretty good. You could obviously go with Protect and then go for like a pivot set. Wisp sets are pretty good. You have a lot of different sets in Rotom. Really just any set you probably would run in singles, you could make it work in doubles. So I'm going to give this thing a solid B tier. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Terra Fire Safety Goggle sets. I think they're pretty strong. But really, just whatever you want to run on this thing is pretty good. Moving on, we have 2 different S tiers, being Palkia, and then we have Palkia Origin. I think on the regulation, the home tier list, I gave the Origin form slightly higher due to the speed, but honestly, it matters a lot less. And I think Palkia is still going to serve best in Trick Room teams. But Palkia Origin with 120 speed could be pretty decent on Tailwind at the very least. But I think the item slot restriction is going to hurt a little bit. So I'm going to give Palkia a slightly higher tiering just due to the fact that, again, you're really running this as a Trick Room setter next to Pokemon like Kalia Ice, for example, or as a really good check to Kyogre Groudon with an Assault Vest, or like a Leftovers. So I think with that in mind, the fact you can't run those items on Palkia Origin definitely does hurt it a little bit. So we're going to give Palkia a slightly higher tier, but truthfully, they're both still really good. They're just run on different teams is all. I think that Palkia is going to be slightly more splashable though. Moving on, we have Arceus. Arceus is definitely going to be a pretty decent option. I'm going to put this thing at the top of S tier. Water Ice with like Recover or Calm Mind and then Protect could be pretty decent, or even like a Recover, Calm Mind, Ice Beam, and then Judgment could be pretty good. I think overall just the defensive typing of Water with some really good tower typing of like a Steel or something just for catching off guard different weaknesses could be pretty decent, or even like a Tower Dragon could be pretty good. However, at the same time though, I think that Arceus Water does have a little bit of an issue with being kind of slow for this format with 120 speed, which I know I talked about like Palkia Origin and Tailwind, but you're not really going to get any good spread moves that Arceus Water would really want to take advantage of. And also the fact that you're locked into the Judgment item without a really good dual secondary stab is going to kind of hurt. I feel like that Arceus Water, if you're trying to run a fast Tailwind option, you're just going to run Palkia Origin instead. But this thing in return will have actual built-in recovery, which is pretty cool, and a really good setup option. So I'm going to put it slightly higher because I do think those things will actually matter a lot in Arceus being a pure water type. We'll just have to see how this thing does. Moving on to Generation 5, we have Samurott, which is going to get an F tier. This thing is just really bad Hisuian Samurott. Doesn't get sharpness, and it's slightly weaker on the physical side. Meanwhile, Hisuian Samurott can get an honest A tier. I think this is a pretty good, decent option with Ceaseless Edge being a really good move. It's a really good Sash Breaker, and the Water Dark typing is actually really good defensively speaking too. This offers really good options into Side Spam cores, especially due to the fact that they typically rely on Hatterene and Armarouge as backup options, and with the immunity to Psychic as well as the ability to Terra into something defensively like a Steel or a Fire for the Fairy for Hatterene, you can actually make this thing to a really good catch-all for different Side Spam leads, and I think that's where it's going to see the most counterplay. Especially with Ceaseless Edge also being a really good way to break Focus Sashes for potential backseaters. You can make a lot work with this Pokemon, I think, and ultimately I'm kind of curious to see where Hisuian Samurott goes. I don't think it's going to be some standout option, but that typing alone is really good offensively, and this has enough bulk to where it could work. With 85 speed too, this is actually even a decent Tailwind option, so we'll give this thing a solid A tier. Basculegion, I put this form on here because of the fact that at least this one can hold in the Violate, but truthfully, Basculin kind of sucks. It's at least got adaptability though, so we'll give this thing an F tier above Samurott, I guess, though its stats are so bad even with the Violate. Alomomola really sucks. This thing has no actual really useful utility, and it at least is regen though, so I'm going to put it above Whiscash. Greninja kind of sucks, but it's fast enough. We'll give this thing a D tier. If this thing had Map Block, I think it might actually have a niche in the metagame, but even still, it's actually really slow for the format, so Map Block wouldn't be as valuable because it's based on your actual speed stat with no priority. Though the move itself is kind of broken because you could block both your attacks as well as your, you can block attacks into your spot as well as into your partner slot, no matter what the move is. And so it's basically like Protect for you and your partner, but it's built off of no priority. And with how much priority is in this format, as well as the fact that Greninja is just not fast anymore compared to boost energy Pokemon, I think it's definitely a D tier. Loaded dice shuriken sets could be kind of cool. Someone actually pointed that out to me, and I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm curious to see how Greninja actually does with that, but I don't know. I don't think it's gonna be that great though. Realistically, definitely not good. Lancer, I fought this thing one time and it almost swept me in Regulation 2, and I think realistically this thing in general is an okay trick room option. We'll give this thing at least a D tier. I think it's at least better than like Vaporeon and stuff. It could be interesting with trick room actually in this Regulation D. I think its speed at 58 is a little fast for it, but it does a lot of damage and this thing is kind of just a really good Terra breaker, so we'll give this thing at least something. D tier is at least good enough for it. Volcanion's kind of cool. I think Volcanion, when it is allowed in VGC, will actually be kind of a nightmare. With Storm Drain, as well as the fact this thing is kind of like a budget water. Well, actually, it's Water Absorb, my bad. With Water Absorb, as well as the fact this thing is really good fire and water typing, this could be good into both sun and rain. However, I think we have a better option for this being Walking Wake, at least right now. Though, at the same time, stuff like Steam Eruption could be pretty good at just getting burns. It's a lot more unique without Scald in the game. So, at least that's something going for it. It's an okay Tailwind option. It's a really good AV sponge with that water fire typing actually offering a lot defensively speaking to most types in the game. I think this thing at least has a lot of merit. I'm going to give this thing a really strong A tier. If this thing had actual Storm Drain instead of Water Absorb, I think I would actually give this thing a really high S tier because Storm Drain would be so much better due to redirecting mons like Palafin. Though Water Absorb is still pretty good due to the fact that you can actually still recover back and it lends a lot of benefits to stuff like Assault Vest builds. So yeah, I think that's where it's really going to shine. It's just a really good Assault Vest tank. It has a lot of good matchup to most really good Pokemon at least. But I don't know how good Volcanion will actually do on its own, like just its own merit. It's at least good enough for A tier though. Moving on to Talk Specs, this thing gets Wide Guard and it has enough benefit with like T-Spikes, I guess. I've actually seen this thing do kind of well in Tour, but I don't think it's going to be consistent enough. I think especially with the power creep that most mons that were introduced in Home actually just shatter this thing. If this was Regulation C, I might consider giving this thing like a low C tier, but I think with most of the new mons introduced, this thing lost a lot of merit. In fact, that actually reminds me that we now have an actual viable Tailwind mon, so I'm actually going to move Lumineon down as well, but I'll put it at least above Clawitzer because of the fact that this thing has enough niche benefits to it with Storm Drain still. But yeah, we have a good Tailwind mon now, so I no longer need to put Lumineon in the C tier. Moving on to Bruxish, this thing can block priority, which is kind of cool. There's actually a lot of priority going around right now, so I'm going to give this thing a C tier though. With stuff like Dragonite, Shampoo, like warping the metagame into such a physical heavy priority heavy metagame. We also have Fake Out Rillaboom into the decks again. We have Urshifu Rapid having good priority, or Urshifu Single having good priority. We have a lot of priority right now. And those are just like really metagame options. There's so many other priority options too. Most teams usually have multiple priority options, I feel like, at this point. So we're going to give Bruxish a C tier. I feel like priority has really become the thing of the metagame. That and booster energy, really, really important to have on most teams. So Bruxish at least has kind of a good niche with that, though Serena is definitely the better option. This has some okay options, though, going for it. Dreadnought's going to get a B tier. I feel like Dreadnought's actually a pretty decent option, and it's established itself as a pretty cool Swim option. Even with Basket Legion being in the game, this thing can potentially do like Bandit sets or Shell Smash sets a little bit better, just due to the fact that Rock Slide is a really good spread move. Basket Legion doesn't really have any good options for spread, at least in the physical set, because you're not going to really run Surf on Basket Legion male due to its lower special attack. But even with the female form, you're not really going to do a lot of damage with the special sets just due to the fact that you only have like 100 special. And that's not to say that Dreadnought is exactly going to be some really high damage dealer, but with Water Rock typing, you do get a Stab Rock Slide with the 15 attack. I want to say Dreadnought has. It's something around 115. I actually do need to check that. Yeah, 115 attack, which is actually pretty good. And with 74 speed, you're only like 4 base slower than Basket Legion. So you can definitely make a lot of sets work with this potentially. I will say though, with the level 50, if you were to go max speed, you actually are 1 point shy of outpacing Regieleki. So you can't actually do that, which is a little unfortunate. You will probably need this thing on Tailwind or just going with like a defensive Terra such as Grass. But Terra Grass has probably always been one of the best Terras on this thing anyway. So honestly, I feel confident if it's like a B tier. It's not going to be any metagame defining Pokemon, but I think it's noteworthy enough to definitely resemble this tier. Moving on to Barraskewda. Barraskewda is kind of shit, but it's probably the fastest Swim option, so I'm at least going to give this thing above Floatzel. I do think that Floatzel is still probably at least competing with the spot, but Barraskewda having options like Psychic Fangs does definitely help a bit, though it's really only the fact that it has a slightly higher damage output than Brick Break does, which is Floatzel's best way to break screens. So we're going to give this thing definitely just like slightly above Floatzel. I do think that overall though, Floatzel does have a little bit more going for it in terms of, specifically, I think it's the fact that this thing is slightly better bulk than Barraskewda does. I use that very loosely, but 24 higher HP and then 5 higher in Phys Def at least is something noteworthy. And truthfully, when you're this egregiously fast anyway, the Swiftstorm will not really make a ton of a difference with 115 speed versus Barraskewda's 136. Most Pokemon don't really care by that point. So we're going to give Barraskewda just like a tiny bit above Floatzel. I think they're both pretty comparable personally. Inteleon sucks, but it has Sniper, which is kind of cool. This thing at least can rank above Quagsire. So Urshifu Rapid, finally a real water type. This thing can get an S+. This thing is probably one of the best water types of all time. Even if we included that dex, I don't think this would really change so much. What makes this thing so good? Surging Strikes. That's all you need to know. Surging Strikes and an Unseen Fist. Being able to guarantee crit for 3 hits. It's a multi-hit water type move that essentially does like 100 something damage. Yeah, after the crit, it does essentially, I think it's like 75, so it's like 105 or something like that. And then you add on the stab and it brings it to like around 150 per hit. And then on top of that, you could stack this thing with like Terra, Mystic Water, etc. And like Rain, and you could really reach like astronomically high individual hits. It's kind of insane. Yeah, after like Rain, Terra Water, Mystic Water, then all of that, like you reach around like 154 per individual hit, which is fucking insanity. This is like Regieleki levels of damage, but you're critting through any sort of stat boost as well. And your opponent can't protect around you. Easy S+ for sure. Basculegion Male, this one's kind of interesting. I thought this thing would be a really strong S tier, but I think honestly Rain has not been that great in prep. Not to say it's bad, I think actually Rain has a lot of merit. It's pretty good fast play style, and with a really good Tailwind mon like Torn, which is arguably a lot better Rain type than Pelipper to be honest right now. At the same time, I think the Basculegion is kind of like a nice backseater. I haven't found myself relying on this mon too much, and I think there's enough going for it against it in the metagame. To where I think a Basculegion just sits at the top of A, and then Basculegion Female, I think this thing will sit at the bottom of B. I think Basculegion Female does have some nice merit with Surf, and I think it's a little underexplored personally with like an Ice Beam, Surf, Shadow Ball, and then Last Respect set with like just choice specs, or even like a Protect set and then ditching Shadow Ball. Because let's face it, most matchups Last Respects will just be a more clippable option, unless if you want to Shadow Ball lead, I guess. But overall, though, I think that they're both kind of viable, but I don't think either are going to be as centralizing as I thought. For what it's worth, I think Basculegion Female actually sits a little bit around where I was thinking. But I really did think that Basculegion Male would be like a really strong S tier, and it just hasn't really proved to be that way. Which is fine, that kind of just happens, but it's just kind of fine. Quaquaval, I'm actually going to give this thing a C tier. I'm going to put it at least right below, well, no, I'm actually going to put it right above Floatzel and Barraskewda. I think this thing actually has a lot of merit, and I still actually think this mon is really underexplored. I will say, with this pick, I'm fairly biased. I think this mon is incredible. I think it's one of the most unique Pokemon in the generation. Aqua Step is a really good speed boosting option. In tandem with Moxie, this essentially turns into a really good Dragon Dance machine. And when you partner this thing next to a really good redirection option like a Moongus, or a really good support with Veil from the Snow Core, or even like a Rage Powder Volcarona, Follow Me, Friend Guard Mousehold, really you have a lot of options for partners that I think all really do benefit Quaquaval pretty well. It's really good in the Ruin Pokemon, it's one of the best offensive checks into those, and with Aqua Step you can turn into a really good Nightmare on Tailwind. I think that this thing will at least have some merit in the home decks. I think it will hold up personally just due to the fact that you can run a Clear Amulet and then match up well into stuff like Landorus after +1, or even just start turning into a really good KO machine before something like an Aleki can slow you down. I think the best set will probably be Terra Flying with like an Acrobatics though, truthfully, or maybe even like a wider set actually with that could be pretty decent due to the fact that you can clear Landorus Intimidate while still being able to match up really well into something like a Rillaboom. I think that overall, Quaquaval definitely has a lot going forward for Regulation D to actually show that it can maybe make a case for the format. So I'm looking forward to seeing what it does. I think it at least earns a C tier for sure though. High C tier, definitely. Wugtrio fucking sucks. It's at least not Love-Disc though. Moving on to Dondozo. This is a real water type. I think Dondozo, honestly, with the home Pokemon, I'm not sure if I want to put it in the S tier or the A tier. Not gonna lie, I'm gonna put it in the S though, just because I have a zoom rail here. I'm gonna put it right above Azu. With Tatsugiri, also, I'm actually gonna put Tatsugiri in the A tier. This might seem a little bit of a hot take, but I think that we've actually seen enough of Solo Dozo doing kind of well. This was mostly an early Regulation C trend, but I don't think that will exactly be too uncommon in Regulation D either. Dozo's a pretty good actual just unaware wall for a lot of the different physical threats, and with stuff like Setup Lando being a thing, I think we could maybe make a case for Solo Dozo being a good defensive mon. Though I think that realistically, obviously you're mostly running this with Tatsugiri. I think the biggest reason for the tiering discrepancy here, though, is the fact you can make solo Dozo work. Solo Tatsugiri is kind of a gimmicky thing. It's not bad Palafin check. It's a really good plot or specs user, but it's a lot worse compared to Dondozo being a really good actual like physical wall that matches up well to a lot of things. Tatsugiri's biggest benefit is just into other water types, and even then, you really do need Tire Steel if you're gonna make this thing into a bundle check. So you're really only kind of working with Palafin here. It's not bad as solo mon. It does make Dozo into a really terrifying threat, and it's really good at cleaning after Dozo did work, but at least Dozo can kind of function on a team without Tatsugiri. I don't think that most teams really want to run Tatsugiri without Dondozo on them, but I guess you could make it work. I don't know. I think that realistically the discrepancy here is kind of small, but it's noteworthy enough to where I think that Tatsugiri at least deserves a tier lower. Veluza's interesting. This thing is fun with Fillet Away. If nothing else, I think this is literally like YouTubermon.jpg. It's at least better than Cloister. We'll give this thing D tier. Moving on to Palafin, we're going to put this thing in the S tier. Now, I know a lot of people still think Palafin is like the messiah, but I think that realistically, when we look at the other S pluses that are coming up shortly, it'll make a lot more sense why this thing is only an S tier. One of the biggest reasons to not run Palafin is truthfully the fact that you have to switch out. And when we look at the fact that we finally have another really good physical water type in the meta through Urshifu Rapid, I think his slot is a lot more contested now, because Urshifu Rapid is a really good wall breaker. This thing can crit through everything. It also has the ability to get through Protect. That's really fucking good. Palafin, though, is still really good with the Jet Punch priority being slightly stronger, but when you factor in the fact that you do need to switch out, really the only big benefit you have is on highly momentum-heavy teams, which Urshifu can still definitely run on, though it typically doesn't in this format due to the fact that you're not running U-turn. But it's also the fact that Palafin definitely really, outside of just leading against Intimidate mons and then switching out due to the fact that you're never staying in anyway, doesn't really have a lot of benefit to be ran here. Palafin is still really good though. It's a fairly bulky water type. It has a pure water typing, which has very few weaknesses, and the 0 to hit ability makes this thing into an absolute nightmare in the late game. But Palafin needing to switch though, objectively, I think is what keeps it out of the S plus tier. Just comparing it to the other Pokemon that naturally start out as broken, if not even better than Palafin, there's no real reason to include Palafin here when it does have to suffer with that huge handicap early on. Moving on to our next water type, we do have Walking Wake. Now personally, I actually think a Walking Wake is probably better than both Kyogre and Urshifu Rapid. I would argue this thing might even be the best water type in the game right now. Walking Wake does have a few really key benefits though that I think that help this thing a lot. For one, you have a really strong option on not only Sun but also Rain, with a really strong stab and Hydro Steam benefiting from both due to the fact that you boost water attacks by 1.5 thanks to Rain, but Hydro Steam's ability means that in Sun you're also boosting the damage of this attack by 1.5, making it the only water type that actually genuinely wants to be ran on a Sun team. Having a water type that can actually viably be ran on Sun though is huge, because a lot of the different weaknesses that Sun teams have can be very easily cleared by a water type, though water is at the same time also pretty weakened by the Sun just due to the fact that its attacks typically do less. In Walking Wake's case though, this can still pressure a lot of different ground and rock types that would otherwise threaten your Sun cores, and the fact that you can boost your speed by 1.5 as well thanks to photosynthesis is really game changing. By just dropping your special attack down to 244 EVs, you can easily make sure that your speed boost is happening with the plus speed nature and max speed, making this thing to a really good cleaner late game, and with the Life Orb you can honestly just start tearing into most teams. Overall, I think Walking Wake will be the water type to be looking out for, and once this thing becomes legal, I think it'll be a top 5 mod in the decks personally. I think even compared to a lot of restricteds, we'll see this thing at the very top of the food chain because it's going to be able to outspeed and outdamage most of them, and with the dragon typing, this already has a fairly good matchup to a lot of them. Overall, definite S plus for me, and I would argue this is probably the best water type in the game. But moving on, we do have one more S plus water type being Iron Bundle. Now, Iron Bundle, I'm actually going to put at the bottom of the S plus tier, but make no mistake, this thing is an absolute monster. With the speed control as well as the booster energy speed, this is arguably the best non-prankster option for speed control, rivaling the likes of even Tornadus, to be honest. With Icy Wind, you can essentially use this thing as a really good mirror into most Tailwind builds and then slow them down before they can actually damage you, which is really beneficial here. You have some really good support with stuff like Encore and Aurora Veil. You also have the spec sets that are very prevalent on both Rain and also Hail, and I think that both teams really do appreciate Bundle's damage output here. Overall, I think the Bundle's best set though is probably the Booster Energy set with like Protect, Icy Wind, Freeze Dry, and then Hydro Pump, as this does allow Bundle to just kind of be a really annoying piece of shit mon that can hit a lot of the format really well. Overall, I think the Bundle is definitely, despite being the worst of the S plus tier, an objective S plus, and I think it's so much better than Palafin, and it's honestly kind of crazy that I think these two ever were really compared as far as being like a best water type in the format, because I think the Bundle really just matches up to so many teams really well, and it's one of those things that a lot of teams just can't handle Bundle because of the support this thing just puts on a lot of matchups. It's really crazy how unrivaled this thing is in terms of speed control, even when you compare a lot of the priority tailwind options that do that role technically faster, because Bundle just offers a lot offensively to matchups too, and it's a mon that's just built around having really good stats to begin with. Let me know what you guys thought of this tier list down below though, and if you enjoyed and you want to see some more options like this, of course, like and subscribe for more. Thank you guys so much, by the way, for supporting during the break. I really appreciate it. I needed just a bit of time to refocus some things, and I really appreciate you guys sticking around for this. Shoutouts to Kurt as well for editing this video. Kurt killed it as always. And shoutouts to our channel members who, for just a couple $1 a month, you get some nice bonus content. We do have a bonus video going up this Saturday, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. Our current channel members are Zeke0, Mia, Bibat, Timo Mueller, Sam, Bam Bambi, Raul Plays, Obo, Johannes B, and Double. Your guys' support on the channel is greatly appreciated. And if you want to become a channel member today, of course, the link to that is going to be down below, where you can support the channel and gain some bonus content. With that said, I'll see you guys in either tomorrow's stream or on Friday's video. Until then, peace out, guys.